Okay, hello everyone. Happy International Youth Day. We welcome everyone to the Building Youth Inclusive Civil Society webinar presented by CIVICUS. The content of today's webinar is based on this year's State of Civil Society report and its theme, Civil Society and Exclusion. Today, three great youth contributors to the report are joining us. I'm your host, Elisa Novoa, and today we're going to discuss ways how to move towards meaningful youth inclusion in civil society. We have a great panel of experts with us today. We're thrilled to have everyone. Thank you very much. Danny, Secretary General of CIVICUS, Andrew Furman, CIVICUS Editor, Michael Hill, President of Youth for Understanding USA, Jennifer Grant, Deputy Director of Child Rights Governance for Save the Children, and we're waiting, he will join us very soon, Anton Dama from the Students' Movement of South Africa. Well, thank you very much all for joining us today. We have an exciting and inspiring session prepared for you. So everyone who is joining us today, feel free to type any question or comment in the Q&A session that you will see in your right. On your right, we will have a 30-minute session at the end of today's webinar to respond to your questions and comments. Also, you can tweet about the webinar using the hashtag CIVICUSYouth. After the webinar, we will be sharing also the recorded conversations. Hopefully we can keep the discussions open in a Twitter party or in a long-term process. So now I'm going to introduce Danny, CIVICUS Secretary General, who will give us a global overview on how can civil society push back youth exclusion and build an inclusive youth civil society. Danny, welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm Danny Sriskandaraja. I'm Secretary General of CIVICUS. For those of you who don't know us or who are new to the CIVICUS family, we're a member-based alliance created about 20-odd years ago to be the sector voice, if you will, for civil society. An alliance now with members in over 175 countries that's there to strengthen citizen action around the world, to speak up for the rights of civil society, to speak up and act to promote the rights of all individuals to take action, speak out, protest, to speak truth to power. And we've been doing that over these last 20-odd years. I've been around at CIVICUS for about 3 years now, and I feel like we're at the best of times and the worst of times when it comes to the role of civil society. In many ways, things are so phenomenally exciting in terms of the way that citizens are organizing and mobilizing around the world. It's never been easier than now to organize a protest or to communicate something, to publicize something because of the power of the internet and social media. And of course, we're so much better connected than ever before. So the struggles that happen in one community, in one locality, can be connected powerfully and meaningfully with struggles and networks all around the world. So if you're interested in solidarity as we are, these are really exciting times. But it's also the worst of times in many ways, because all around the world, just as we would expect the space for citizens to organize and mobilize to be opening up, we're finding the opposite is happening. Last year, as Andrew Furman will tell you in a second, we documented serious threats to one or more civic freedoms, assembly, association, and expression, in 109 countries around the world. And not just in autocracies and dictatorships, but even in relatively mature democracies, we're seeing the space for civil society, the civic space, shrinking. And that's unacceptable if we want to live up to the commitments that many states have made to protecting our individual freedoms. But it's also deeply worrying because civil society is at the forefront of so many struggles around the world, whether that's around climate change, gender equality, children's rights, or peace. And so this webinar comes at a really interesting time for us because we've just published our State of Civil Society report, and I'm really delighted to have Andrew, our editor, and 3 contributors going to share some of their views. But the theme this year on inclusion, I hope, is also particularly relevant to to youth activists who might be joining us on this call, because civil society is supposed to be there to give power to people's struggles, to voice or amplify marginalized voices, to include where we can, to make our own societies and our own struggles more inclusive. And of course, including youth activists and addressing the challenges, the particular challenges faced by young people in civil society is really important. Let me close by saying one thing that I'm going to be looking out for over the next hour and a half is any advice that you all have for us at CIVICUS about how we can improve our own practice when it comes to engaging young people and incorporating youth activists in our own networks. Elisa and others have re-energized our own youth action team, which I hope you know about, and if you don't, she will tell you more about, which is our way of engaging young people through our own sort of governance and policy structures. And of course, we have a very diverse board, which includes several young activists. But that's not enough. You know, if these days the gap between organized bits of civil society, the bureaucratic, institutionalized large NGOs, social movements, youth activists, the social media space, that gap seems to be increasing. And one of the roles that we hope CIVICUS can play is helping to bridge that gap, to make sure that all of civil society is included in these discussions. So I'm really looking forward to this next hour and a half. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Danny. Now I would like to introduce you to Andrew Furman, CIVICUS editor. He will give us an overview of the key findings of the State of Civil Society Report 2016. Andrew, welcome.
Thanks, Elisa, and hi, everyone. So I'm the editor and writer of the State of Civil Society Report, which is something CIVICUS produces each year to give a snapshot and a health check and an assessment of where civil society is right now, how it's being affected by contemporary events, how it's responding to those events, to celebrate civil society success stories when they are, to talk about the challenges civil society faces and how we can overcome them. And each year it has a special theme, and as has been mentioned, the theme this year was on this question of inclusion and how civil society combats exclusion. So what I'm going to do now, just for a few minutes, is talk about sort of some of the key ideas and findings. Essentially, where we are now is in extraordinary times for the world and for civil society. We live in times of sort of epic contestation, epic challenges. We live in a time where the economic consensus of the 1980s, 1990s, early 2000s is unraveled. Questions are being asked about the ability of economics as it stands to deliver growth and prosperity. People are facing renewed insecurity in numerous respects, including in their livelihoods. And inequality is growing, even in countries that are experiencing economic growth. The gaps between the rich and the poor are growing. People are finding it increasingly hard to struggle to make a living. Large corporations at the same time are becoming less transparent, more extractive. The need to extract resources for business is having profound human rights effects on communities in many countries around the world. These are contested times. There are also contested times at the level of human insecurity. People are facing renewed threats, including in the contexts and countries of the world where people haven't really been accustomed to experiencing violence and now experiencing terrorism and extremist threats. We live in times when conventional notions of democracy are being contested and are unraveling. People are withdrawing from conventional forms of participation. Extremism and populism seems on the rise. There's a renewed confidence in xenophobia and racism in many contexts and in fundamentalist viewpoints. Now, these are all issues that affect citizens as a whole, but they affect people who are already excluded in some way more profoundly, because people who are members of an excluded group struggle more to access livelihood, struggle more to resist violence and extremism, struggle more to get their voices heard through conventional political means. So, you know, if there's a take-home message I want to convey, it's that we live in times of particular extraordinary contestation. And our societies are failing when it comes to a key test, which is, you know, the test of any society should be that how it treats its most marginalized people and how its most excluded people, how it finds ways to bring those people in and involve them. And if you apply that test to our societies, and our societies are failing, they are not just. Now, in response to all these challenges, civil society is incredibly important. It's important because it's the arena where progressive values can be developed and propagated and defended. It matters because this is where solutions come from and alternatives to failed consensus and models that are letting people down. Civil society is where ideas are born. It's where groups who are otherwise excluded can organize themselves, can develop their demands, to articulate their voice. It's civil society organizations help excluded groups. They help them access services, develop their voice, develop new forms of participation. So in these contested times, there's never been a more profound need for civil society. Civil society here understood in a diverse sense as all the manifestations of people's participation, the articulation of people's demands, organizations, activism, online activity, all forms part of civil society here. This is one of the reasons why civil society is being attacked and restricted in more and more contexts. As Danny mentioned, our research last year is 109 countries are experiencing quite serious attacks on the free fundamental rights that are long established in international law as being the basis for civil society. To have civil society, you need to have the right to association, the right to peaceful assembly, and the right to freedom of expression. And these rights are being rolled back in every global region, in rich and poor countries, in democracies and autocracies. The ways those attacks are mounted, there are a range of tactics, including the introduction of new laws and regulations, the misuse of the legal system. A particular source of attack at the moment is on the funding basis for civil society organizations. New measures are being introduced in many countries to make it harder for civil society organizations to receive funding. And then attacks come in the form of verbal harassment, physical attack. These things are being seen everywhere. There's also a rejection of, in some quarters of civil society, as a foreign or a foreign assisted concept. There's a rejection of civil society on the basis of its funding may come from another country and so on. Even though civil society exists indigenously in every country has its own forms of civil society. There's an association of civil society with extremism, even though extremism is a source of attack on many civil society organizations and activists. There's a growing equation of criticism with terrorism. The steps that would normally be understood to be between the legitimate articulation of criticism and attacks on society those conceptual steps are being eroded, and criticism is being equated with terrorism increasingly. Now, the civil society that is most attacked and restricted is the civil society of the most excluded. So there's a double loss of voice here for most excluded groups. If you look around the world, typically the civil society organization and activists that are facing the most restriction are those that seek the human rights of women, seek the human rights of minorities, seek LGBTI rights, and seek land, environmental, and indigenous rights. Those civil society organizations have been formed because excluded groups are denied voice, are denied equality, are denied participation, and they in turn are being particularly restricted and attacked. This is happening because, of course, those groups challenge the status quo. They ask questions about power and its distribution. That makes them dangerous to people who want to maintain the status quo of power. It's not all negative. I mean, the danger of this presentation is that it could come across as somewhat gloomy, but what we're seeing all around the world, and we saw last year and we're seeing this year, is people rise up against these restrictions, and they rise up against structures that are denying them voice and participation. We talk a lot in the report about the hotspots of protest and dissent that we've seen in different contexts in the world recently. We're going to hear an example from that in South Africa later. Now, what's important here is young people are at the forefront of many of these new forms of protest and mobilization, mass demonstrations. Young people are often the organizers of these, because new movements tend to be horizontally organized, they're self-organizing, they don't have the traditional decision-making structures of an organization. So that's a really interesting thing that's happening now. In many cases, those protests are themselves being repressed, but people are denying fear to come out and articulate their voices anyway. But still more needs to be done, right? And so it's important for us in the State of Civil Society report not just to bemoan the situation, but to try and put forward ideas for what might change. So I want to round off this contribution just by suggesting a few ideas for what might need to be done, and maybe there's something that we can discuss later. We know in civil society we're not always good at talking about why civil society matters and why these issues of civil society rights and freedoms are important to citizens, to democracy, to good government, and to development. We know we need in civil society to get better at making the case for civil society and why it's important and why it matters. That's something we need to work on. Now, as part of this, civil society needs to come together, you know, where there's lots of different civil society organizations and activists, including on different aspects of exclusion that work in their own niches but don't necessarily connect. So, you know, a question for this discussion might be, how do youth organizations and movements of young people connect with civil society as a whole, including the traditional form and established forms of civil society organization? There needs to be closer working together, because otherwise we will be divided and ruled. We need to work as well at the international level to articulate that human rights, including civil society rights, exist at the international level. They're there, but they're not domesticated. They're not carried down to the national level. So we need to connect our work at the local national level to our work at the international level. It's another form of connection that we need to do. Civil society needs to be exemplary, needs to prove that it's a sphere that is particularly accountable to citizens and is particularly transparent to citizens, that has strong legitimacy, that rests in the support citizens have for civil society, and to reject criticisms that civil society is something that is foreign-owned, or that is artificially supported, or that gets in the way of what people want. So civil society needs to develop its capacity to be excellent and prove it's excellent in every sphere. And finally, we need more information. We need more regular data. We need to understand trends. We need to understand what's happening in different countries. We need to report on that, and we need to make evidence the basis for our action. And that's something that CIVICUS is taking forward. After the report in October, we'll be launching the CIVICUS Monitor, which will be an online platform which will document what is happening to civil society rights in every country of the world. That's intended to be interactive and engaging, and there's scope there for people to get involved in that platform and in tracking what's happening to civil society in their locale. So listen, that's just a very brief summary of what is a very large report. The panelists coming up after me are going to talk more about their contributions to the report that they've made, because the panelists have helped us produce this report and written parts of it, and they're going to talk more about exclusion and civil society in their spheres. But I hope I've just given you a very brief overview of some of the contemporary issues in civil society and some of the civil society responses to that. Thank you.
Thank you. It's very inspiring. Now I would like to introduce you to Michael Hill, CEO of Youth for Understanding USA and author of the essay Creating a New Standing Army of Young People.
Great.
Welcome.
Well, thank you, and thank you for including YFU in this year's Civil Society report. It was a lot of fun to participate and think about these issues in the context of the broader conversation about what's happening in civil society. YFU was founded in 1951 with a pretty easy premise, one thought, after World War II, when Germans in the United States may have loathed each other more than others. YFU was asked to bring 75 young Germans to the United States for a year, and initially it was thought to be a democracy-building initiative, and quickly realized that it was more powerful to put young people into different cultures to have them truly understand it from the inside out. Those first students spent a year here and went back with different ideas of this country beyond what they may have heard or thought in their own countries. At this point, as we were writing this piece, YFU is at its 65th anniversary, and it's really a point of inflection for us where we're begging the question of what's next for youth and the movement to participate in creating a more peaceful world. The founding premise had YFU as a participant in trying to make sure that we didn't see a World War III, but we know that today's wars aren't traditional. Alone, if you look at some of the bombings in the past year in Paris and Beirut, we're seeing very non-traditional moments of violence and engagement. But it's also pointing out tears in the fabric of our society and asking us tough questions. So after the Paris bombings, appropriately, vigils were held and international media raised what happened there. But within weeks of that, there was also a major bombing in Beirut. And we didn't talk a lot about that, and we didn't hold up worldwide vigils for the young people and for the adults in Beirut that had equally lost life. And so I think the dilemma for us as we look at how young people can participate in a civil society is how to bring them into being a part of an essential ingredient in the solution. We know in many ways that we place the hopes of our future on young people, but we're not doing that in much in this quest for peace or a more peaceful world. We were founded by a woman named Dr. Rachel Andreessen in 1951, and I'm really proud that she was actually nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. We've asked ourselves a lot of questions about what would she do today, and I think actually the work that she did then is not all that different from ours today. It's still the case that when conflict and terror exist, people move from a place of fear to a place of hatred to then usually a place of violent action. And so we're asking ourselves the question of how do young people play a role, and the piece outlines that as well. How might we think of young people as a standing army for peace versus the armies that we have of destruction? I want to share a couple stories with you by way of introduction, and one that I shared in the piece is of a young man named Rami who came from the Palestinian territory on a YFU exchange program. And we had received young people from that part of the world for a while, and we had tried to place him in a rural town in Pennsylvania. And the school board there initially fought the placement because they were afraid that he might bring anti-Semitic views to that part of their community. We were successful in getting him placed there. He had a great year, did a number of presentations, but the initial reason that they were upset was that on his visa application, he listed as his country of origin occupied Palestine. And for the United States, who has played an on and off again role in that conflict, that struck a chord. And what we had shared with the school district was what a wonderful opportunity to understand more globally what's happening in society and through the eyes of young people to give a different version of the story. David Gergen, in his outlook on the global agenda for 2015, says that so many of the world's ills could be solved if we simply had a global perspective, if we understood how the other is walking through their day-to-day lives. And so I think part of the question as we look at how young people might play a role in advancing healthy civil societies is how do we help create that perspective for young people in a hyper-connected world. I work in international exchange, and one of my least favorite things to hear, because I don't believe it's true, is that people don't need to engage with other people because we have web-based ways to see into others' cultures. You know, we have YouTube and we have all of these social media platforms that give a view into another culture, but I think what we believe is that it gives a filtered view, and that it's really only through deep engagement that young people can truly understand other cultures. and it's only through deep engagement in those other cultures that they might be a part of the solution for the future. In the piece, we outlined some key challenges, at least for those of us that have been trying to do people-to-people work. Certainly the cost of trying to find ways for young people to experience cultures has gone up exponentially, and so we're wrestling with that. But there's also two other pieces that I think societies are putting hurdles in place, some for understandable reasons. There's a heightened sense in the world of a sense of protectionism, and that certainly just isn't for those young people that might come to the United States. We work with about 65 partners, and I'm often struck when their own governments and parents caution young people against coming to the United States because of our own recent spouts of racist and violent actions in our cities. So regardless of where you are, there's a sense that we should stick closer to home, and yet we know that if we stick closer to home, young people really can't understand another culture in a way that allows them to be a part of the solution. We also know that as societies are trying to put more and more educational requirements on kids, the ability for them to go and explore and being part of a global patchwork is tougher and tougher. You know, YFU, we believe that it's essential that we create a world of interconnected global citizens, and I think there's a few solutions that we posit that might be interesting for the group to kick around. In a humanist way, you know, I think there are many humanists that are fearful of technology, but we believe technology can be used as actually a deep tool for engagement. YFU has just launched a virtual exchange initiative where we're trying to help young people have dynamic conversations with one another, curated by young people. If you go back up to what I said earlier, that fear and a lack of understanding can quickly lead to violence. If we can find a way for young people to understand the realities of their respective communities, we think there's actually a chance to make them active parts of the solution toward creating healthier civil societies. But there's work for the rest of us to do. Corporations really need to step up and demand that intercultural education and engagement be a part of their corporate global responsibility. We hear so often that the workforces of tomorrow must be populated by young people who are globally connected. So I believe that corporations have a responsibility to make that an essential pillar of their social responsibility platforms. But we also know that governments need to place intercultural engagement at the heart of their own public diplomacy. And those of us that care about youth engagement also need to find ways to break down those walls. Shortly after World War II, Rachel Andreessen was in Europe when they turned the lights back on again in a key city. And one of the things she said that I think is still true today is she said, all of our work must make sure that the lights never go out again. So again, thank you for allowing us to be a part of this year's Civil Society report. It'll be interesting to see how the other panelists share their perspectives and how we might find a common solution toward helping young people be a key ingredient in creating healthier civil societies.
Thank you very much, Michael. We hope so too. Now I'll hand over to Jennifer, Grand Deputy Director of Child Rights Governance of Save the Children. She's joining us from England, and also is a youth guest contributor to this year's report. Jennifer, welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure how there I go. Hi everyone, thank you very much. Just to say that I'm a great fan. I've been working in the area of children's rights and human rights for many years, and I'm a great fan of CIVICUS and the work that you do. I think it's extremely important. So thank you so much for inviting us to be part of the report and indeed to be part of today's discussions. I'm going to start with just a couple of reflections, both from what's been said so far, and also I watched the webinar on the launch of your report in July, and a couple of reflections before I go in to really talk about how I think we can support children and youth to be able to access their civil rights and freedoms more effectively, and therefore be able to be vibrant members of civil society. So yeah, just to say, Andrew mentioned new times, and I think he's absolutely right. And there are both positive and negative challenges, as he rightly set out, around there being new times. But actually,
sorry, we're having a technical problem. I lost sound.
I think it would be good if we maybe moved up and welcomed our next presenter, who is a representative from the South African Students Movement, and Impo Ndaba, who will speak a bit on this new generation of students' movements in South Africa and their global relevance.
Yep.
It's Danny here. Hello, everyone. Sorry for the technical glitches. We've had a double technical glitch. So Jennifer's lost us, and we haven't been able to connect with our comrade from the Fees Must Fall movement in South Africa. I've just been looking at the questions submitted about what are the ways in which we best promote youth engagement in civil society, and maybe I'll give Andrew and Michael a chance to come back on this as well. But for me, from my experience at CIVICUS, one of the most fascinating things that I've seen is we had something called the Youth Advisory Group, which was the precursor to the Youth Action Team that Elisa is now involved in. And when I started, we had a group of amazing young activists, 6 or 8 of them, who were as part of our Youth Advisory Group. And as some of you may know, our elections at CIVICUS to the board are completely open. So if you want to be a member of the board and be our boss, if you will, at the Secretariat, you simply nominate, and if you get your nomination through, you go to the election. And I remember having a conversation with members of these youth advisory groups saying, well, might you guys think about nominating for the board? And they said, oh, are you sure? We won't get elected. Are you sure? Anyway, eventually they caucused, and 2 of them did come forward. And of course, what happened? Those 2 got elected very easily onto the board. And so for the last 3 years, for that board, and of course even for this current board, now that we've set the sort of precedent, we've had young people as young as 24, I think in one case, be full members of our board. And to me, this was a lesson in a number of things. One is that it's so much better from our point of view as a CIVICUS Secretariat to have young people on our main board rather than just on these side groups or working groups. And I think, I really wish more civil society organizations did that. And secondly, of course, that what was interesting to watch was that the activists who are members of this group, in a way, didn't need my permission or our permission to do any of this. I mean, they were amazing people with huge amounts of confidence, but it was really instructive to see that there was a little trigger. We just had to sort of sow the seed, saying, have you thought about nominating for the board? And then that triggered this nomination. And of course, now we've got we continue to have young people who are members of our board. Now, I'm not saying that being a member of the board is the be-all and end-all of youth engagement, but I do think that if we did a sort of study of the boards of many of our NGOs around the world, far too many of them would have an average age that would be upwards of 50 or 60, rather than have an average age that's closer to the average age of the world's population, or at least have a diversity of people represented on board. So I do think that if anyone's listening to this and are thinking about ways of getting involved in sort of mainstream civil society organizations, NGOs, for example, please do think about nominating for a board. And I just to close, from my own experience, I was in my early 20s when I saw an ad to become a trustee of an NGO that worked on refugee issues. And I thought, well, I'm really interested in refugees. I was studying it and researching it. I'd done some volunteering and activism in that area. So I just sent my my application forward, and then was interviewed by this board, and they said, oh, why did you even apply for this? And I sort of gave them my explanation, left the interview thinking they'll never call back. And of course, luckily, they did call back and say, we'd love to have you. And I was by far the youngest person on that board, maybe 20 years between me and the next youngest person. But again, from my personal experience, it was a great way of getting involved and contributing to the life of civil society. So that's my answer when it comes to sort of board membership on that front. I don't know if Andrew and Michael wanted to add any more insights on that question.
Yeah, I think that's great, and it's a question that I know in the United States we're asking about how to engage young people more in in the governance structure. I think one of the things I found most fascinating this year in 2 different projects we tried, one is in the virtual initiative, is having young people curate the conversations of young people. I think so often when we do program administration for young people, we create programs that we think that they should want to have and deliver them to them and hope that they will be the beneficiaries of this wonderfully brilliant thing we've constructed. So finding ways to bring young people into the life of actually helping to design and implement programs, I think is a dynamic way to engage them. The other piece is, well, not necessarily a board, is to think through alumni and other programs where young people can come back and contribute as volunteers. We know about this generation that if they can't see a definite impact they're making and participate in sculpting the movement, they're less interested to participate. And so all of these ways that we can think of to bring young people into the center of the lives of running and sculpting our organizations is going to be essential if we want their voice.
Andrew, did you want to have a go at any of those that question from your experience on SOCs?
Yeah, I can. I mean, you know, there's no one-size-fits-all model, and I think part of the job that we have to do is to continue to document and extract learning from and share different models of involving excluded people, including young people in civil society organizations. But I also think that's not the only question. I think there's another question of what can civil society organizations themselves learn from new forms of organization, new social movements, new horizontal organizing rather than vertical organizing that's non-hierarchical, that doesn't function in the traditional way of having a traditional decision-making structure that we've seen since late 2010 and through the last 5 years in mass mobilizations, Occupy protests, the protests we've seen in South Africa and in many other countries in recent years. I think part of the question should be that what can those of us who work within the structures and confines of established civil society organizations, which are always somewhat bureaucratic, how can we learn from those kind of models? So how can there be more a pooling of learning from all those different organizations and movements? But I think Jennifer's back now, so
sorry, I don't actually know when you lost me. Apologies.
Early on, yeah. So I think what I'm going to do is hand back over to Jenny, right?
Could you just tell me where I got to?
You were just starting, really, and then I'm afraid you froze and we couldn't hear anything.
Oh my goodness, what a shame. Okay, I'm so sorry about that. I don't. Did I mention stuff about the invisibility of children's activism? Any of my reflections on what you were saying, Andrew, and Mandeep were saying in the other webinars before I went on to talk about the particular obstacles and recommendations?
You were just getting to that, and then we lost you. So I think that would be a good.
Yeah. Okay. Gosh, I'm terribly sorry about that. Yeah. So yeah. Going back to the point of, I'll start then from just saying that we have consulted 1,600 children in 60 countries recently around the way that they access their civil rights and freedoms. And a lot of what they said, interestingly, does relate to the article that we wrote, and therefore I will, I will be able to kind of talk about both the research and the points that I raised in our article side by side. I mean, I think the major thing to say is that children want to be involved. Over 80% of children responding to the consultation said that they were interested in being active civil society members, but 62% felt that they weren't safe doing that necessarily always in public protests and the like. So I think that there is a real role for adult civil society to keep children safe in accessing their civil rights and freedoms. I'm just going to check that you can still hear me.
Yes.
Yeah, I can.
Great. Okay. So in terms of moving on to the specific recommendations and obstacles, I think one of the main things is that children around the world generally don't feel that adults are listening enough to them or that take their views seriously enough. And that isn't just government officials. It is also members of adult civil society, and indeed, obviously, within the home and schools. So I think one of the things we really need to do if we want to take child and youth participation seriously is that we need to also prepare adults to receive that participation and not just prepare children and youth to give it. We often focus on empowerment, which is very important, and rights awareness raising and all of that with children and youth, which is really, really important, so that they feel able to, that they have the tools they need to be able to be active members of civil society. But I think we also need to prepare adults about their kind of preconceived ideas, you know, their fears, their obstacles to receiving and being influenced by the voices of children and youth. And so that's a really strong call, I think, that we really need to do much more about. And I think the other thing that comes across very strongly is that there aren't enough spaces for children to meet, learn and take joint action. And I mean, we know as adult civil society how useful it is to come together, to be able to talk, to share stories, to share strategies, to effectively mobilize and then advocate. And children are no different. You know, they really want those flexible spaces to meet, learn about their rights and to take joint action. And it sometimes makes sense for them to share spaces with adult civil society, but they also want and need their own spaces. And so I think we need to do much more to make sure that they have flexible spaces that feed into their own timetables around schooling and education, and that is actually run and governed by themselves, where they can mobilize and share and act from, in a way. I think the other thing that's very clear from our work, and we work a lot with children in local governance, particularly around policy planning and budgets and things like that in many countries around the world, they really want more formal recognition as actors by governments. So not just working with NGOs, but working directly with governments, and they want formal mechanisms to enable that communication with governments. And so I think we as civil society really need to lobby governments to set that up. We need to work with governments to make sure that that's meaningful engagement, and prepare governments within those mechanisms to receive the participation of children. But children want to be involved in budget discussions. They want to be involved in decisions about spending, particularly on issues that directly affect them around health and education and social protection. And I think we need to facilitate that more effectively. Then I think there's also the issue of access to information. I mean, it is great, you know, the internet is the kind of great leveler in some ways in terms of accessing information. Obviously, it goes without saying that there are lots of young people without any access to the internet. So, you know, the internet is not available to everyone, and particularly not to excluded groups often. And also children are increasingly aware of surveillance. And so in our consultations, they were saying that they were finding that they felt less secure using the internet to access information, which I think is very interesting. But also, you know, they have a right as their civil right to information, but that information needs to be child friendly. It needs to be information that they can actually access. So I think both as civil society and in our job as kind of advocates to government, you know, we need to really make sure that the information can be digested and understood by children on issues that affect them. So we need to do much more around that. And then finally, I think there is an issue around voting. I mean, recently in the UK, with the Brexit vote, you know, young people are very angry about the fact that they didn't have roles in that, and that's been covered in the media. In that seismic political decision that they, you know, that the 16 to 18 particularly weren't able to engage in. And I think that the world is starting to look at this issue of voting, and in many, in countries that, they have reduced to 16, Cuba, Brazil, Nicaragua, Argentina, Austria, and the like, and to 17 in other countries like Sudan, Indonesia, South Sudan, etc. But I think that children and young people are very much saying that civil society needs to do more on reducing the voting age to 16, and that they are very keen to have that kind of formal acknowledgement as being democratic actors, if you like. So I think those are some of the things that have come through for us in our work and in our consultation that are really, really important for us to think about in civil society, about how we can support children and youth to much more meaningfully engage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. I see we have one question from the audience. He's asking, how can we empower non-political youth groups to have their voices heard without having to take part in drastic measures such as mass movements, burning and destroying infrastructure in the country? What structures can we suggest to national governments?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's to the panel more generally, isn't it? Just to jump off and say that I think one of the key things is we need to ask the young people how we can best support them. I mean, we work a lot with young people, and I haven't met any that are interested in burning infrastructures and the like. I mean, I think most young people, in the way that most adults are interested in positive change within their societies. So I think the first thing is ask those young people, how can we best support you to get your right to health, education, social protection, adequate standard of living, etc. And I think we've got different models from around the world so that we can draw on. I mean, Latin America have very vibrant youth governance mechanisms, from youth and children's parliaments to formal consultations around things like planning policies and budget. We can provide a civil society space and funding for groups to meet, and obviously with the caveat that we would want to make sure that they were, in the same way that we support any adult civil society, we would want to make sure that they were didn't have a destructive agenda. So yeah, I mean, I think there's many country examples of where about how that's been done really effectively, and the first thing to do is to ask the young people themselves.
Yeah, that is the best resource. I agree. We have also a question for Michael. In the Youth for Understanding guest essay, you talk about the importance of cross-cultural engagement and how YFU believes that must start during school years. But how does YFU engage youth in designing programming, or what are the key ways that you have found help strengthen youth engagement in the institutional level?
Sure. Well, thanks for the question. YFU is actually a confederacy of more than 60 organizations around the world that are trying to find ways for young people to experience different cultures. And many of the YFU organizations have young people on their boards, but there's also a number of volunteer structures where young people's voices play a heavy role in forming programs. So, for example, in the U.S. operation, we have something called a Campus Ambassadors program that, when young people come back from their year on exchange, they form not only a working group and an advisory group to those of us running the day-to-day of the programs, but they actually go out and talk to other young people about what they would like to see as we continue to build and grow programs. I think all of us in the nonprofit sector and the NGO structure struggle with finding ways to allow increased voices of our participants while doing the day-to-day stuff of balancing budgets and keeping the lights on. But I think what we've consistently seen at YFU is that when you bring young people into the life of sculpting programs and running organizations, that tends to have the benefit of being a stronger organization that grows. So those are just a couple ways that we've looked at it. Again, some of the YFU organizations have young people heavily on their boards. Some YFU organizations, the majority of their boards are returning young people. So just a couple of quick examples.
No, thank you.
Just to add something, that we've actually got some publications that I'm happy to send to you that you can then maybe circulate with participants, which are different country examples of how we support children's civil rights and freedoms around the world, and some programming guidance around how to do that more effectively and stuff. So that might be of interest to people.
Yeah, thank you very much. That sounds wonderful. Actually, what we hope to do, this is the first CIVICUS Youth webinar, and we hope to organize several more during the coming years. This is the start of the CIVICUS Youth Working Group, so what we hope is to create this community where we can share information, opportunities, reports, organizations that have already advanced on research, how to engage youth meaningful, and we can put it in practice. So please share everything. We will continue communicating with our youth members of the year. Actually, now this month is a pretty important and interesting month. We are opening the consultation for the strategic priorities 2017-2021. So we look forward for youth voices to be part of it also, and be able to shape the priorities of the coming years for CIVICUS. So yeah, thank you. The chat will be still open, and the video is recorded, so it is on YouTube. If you think about any question or comment afterwards, feel free to post it. We hope to keep the discussion alive in these coming days. Yeah, hope you have a great Youth Day today. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.